Good afternoon and welcome to the second Advancing Educational Equity series, Social Indicators Impacting Educational Success in the Black and African American Community. The series highlights efforts of educational organizations tackling systemic challenges for Arizona's students of color through the voices of educational leaders, some with lived experiences, and the lens of the state education progress meters. My name is Teniqua Broughton, and I serve as the founding executive director for the State of Black Arizona. The State of Black Arizona creates a platform for the synthesis of data, demographics, and research on issues and concerns that relate to African Americans in Arizona. The data is intended to help support action planning and informed decision-making to provide solutions that improve the lives of all Arizonans. My colleagues and I are excited to have such a positive response from the community for the engagement and participation in this conversation. I cannot express the gratitude that I have to all of my fellows, educators, advocates, and allies on this webinar for today's conversation. Before we begin the webinar, please note that the webinar is being recorded. If you find that you need to depart early or know someone who could not join us but would love to listen to the conversation, the recording will be available on the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership's webpage between 36 to 48 hours after the webinar. For any questions during the webinar, please place them in the Q&A box. And if you have any curiosities, statements, or would like to network with participants, you can do that in the chat. Don Wallace and Sarah Larson will be tracking all questions and comments as they are posted. We plan to address as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. I would like to thank the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership and its leadership, Don Wallace, for supporting the necessity for designing this series. Far too often, I hear the disappointment of people of color having challenges to amplify their voices around issues and concerns that affect them the most. We have invited leaders from the Greater Phoenix Leadership and Roosevelt Elementary School District today to address social determinants of educational equity. You will get to hear about their collective work in creating and carrying out GPL's education game plan and the Roosevelt work strategy. What are social determinants? Social determinants of health are economic and social conditions that influence individuals and groups of differences in health stature. Factors like socioeconomic status, education, neighborhood, and physical environment can serve as determinants by which their circumstances or their environment. Before we begin our conversation, we would love to hear who's in the room. So we have a few polling questions. Can we get our first polling question up? Be ready. Let us know what area of the state you are joining us from. All right, take a few more seconds if you haven't. All right. So 87% of us live in urban areas of our state. All right, let's go for question number 2. What sector do you represent? All right, take a few more minutes. All right, so nonprofit and education are represented here. Nice, excellent, thank you. And our final polling question. All right, goes. Which social determinants of health has the greatest impact of education? You can answer that based off of the description I shared or what you know and understand about social determinants. All right, please take a few more moments and make sure you have submitted your selection. All right. All right, so polling results show that the majority of people have said the greatest impact is economic opportunities. So Dr. Carter and Dr. Boyce, that will be definitely something for you guys to make sure you address and discuss in your presentations. So let's get to introducing our speakers. First, I'm going to introduce Dr. Heather Carter. Dr. Heather Carter is the Executive Vice President with Greater Phoenix Leadership, with a special focus on P20 education. She just completed her 10th year in the Arizona legislature, congratulations, both having served in the House of Representatives and Senate. Heather serves as the Vice Chair of the House Education Committee, reducing government regulations and funded mandates so that schools can excel in their primary duties, educating students. She has been a professor at ASU and, yes, a middle school teacher. She has a master's degree in educational technology from ASU, go Devils, and earned a doctorate degree in education leading from Northern Arizona University. So she's a lumberjack as well. So let's welcome Dr. Heather Carter. And then Dr. Quintin Boyce. Dr. Quintin Boyce was born and raised in Chicago and has been an educator since 2002. In 2005, he began working at Phoenix Union High School District as a teacher at South Mountain and at the Biosciences High School, where he taught biology, chemistry, and forensic, like forensic files. After earning his doctorate from Arizona State University, another Sun Devil, in 2012, he moved into school level administration as a principal of the Biosciences High School and later Camelback High School. He also served as an executive director of teaching and learning at Phoenix Union prior to joining Roosevelt School District as the superintendent. He was the executive director of teaching and learning at Phoenix Union. Dr. Boyce is married. He has 2 daughters and a son. And as of today, the 3rd daughter may be on the way, but we have asked her to hold off until 4 o'clock. So please support beyond that so we can get him through this workshop. He enjoys remaining active in his community and engaged in recreational sports. Can we please welcome Dr. Heather Carter and Dr. Quintin Boyce.
Thank you, everyone. Well, it is such a pleasure to be here with you today and to be able to share this time with so many people. I'm looking at the attendees list, friends and colleagues that I've worked with. And thank you, Dr. Boyce, for being here with us too. And tell your wife we appreciate her allowing us to borrow a little bit of your time as you welcome this new member of your family as well today. So I just want to take a little bit of time and say not only thank you to Teniqua and to the group and to Dawn Wallace and the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership for hosting this, but also to share with you the work that I've undertaken in my new role at Greater Phoenix Leadership. For those of you who don't know what Greater Phoenix Leadership is as an organization, they are an organization that is brought together by a number of CEO members in the Valley. Many of you may have heard of the organization historically called the Phoenix 40. Well, I like to call this the Phoenix 144, because now we are an organization, Greater Phoenix Leadership, made up of 144 CEOs who come together to share time, talent, resources to tackle some of the most challenging problems that we have in Arizona, and really with the future of Arizona and its citizens at heart, at our hearts and mind. So to begin our conversation, I thought I would share with you a little bit about our organizational structure. And just a quick thumbs up. Well, everybody's off camera. I'm assuming you can see that. Maybe Teniqua or Dr. Boyce, if you could just get up back on and make sure I'm sure. Okay, thank you, Dr. Boyce.
Yep,
always a teacher at heart, making sure you can see it. So Greater Phoenix Leadership underwent a strategic planning process over the last year. And the CEOs were very interested in getting more involved around the social determinants. So as you heard described in the introduction, there's a variety of things that are intertwined with looking at moving the economy and the quality of life forward for the state of Arizona. So historically, Greater Phoenix Leadership really worked on education issues, some transportation issues. We had a public policy committee. But as you can see, we've reorganized around 3 standing committees: community infrastructure, social impact, and education. Within each of those standing committees, we have a number of task forces. And those task forces look at the social determinants of health, social determinants of education, social determinants of employment, and how they are intertwined to solve some of the complex problems we face as a state. As we tackle some of those issues in the task force, then the standing committee would look at those issues. It would move over to public policy, and we really try to engage at the appropriate level of government. So some things may be a city issue or something in your local communities, maybe even a governing board issue, or a state issue, or perhaps even a federal issue. And then obviously we have our board of directors that come together and work as the executive team for Greater Phoenix Leadership. So I was, unfortunately, I lost my primary election in October, but the silver lining of losing an election allows me to do this important work with Greater Phoenix Leadership. So I was brought on board October 1st to really tackle the education policy work that we need to undertake as a state. And in doing so, we've built out the call for an education game plan. So I will start by sharing this quick presentation that we've put together. It was launched, and just a quick thumbs up again if you guys can see it, if you don't mind popping back on the camera, or Teniqua just letting me know if you can see it. Thank you, Dr. Boyce.
Yep.
So we've put together what's called the need for a comprehensive education game plan. We really want to focus on leveling the playing field for our students in Arizona. And I'll start by saying we don't have the answers. This is really a call for the community to come together across the state, across different stakeholder groups, and really unpack the challenges that we face in education in a very collaborative fashion. And we, as the CEO organization, would like to convene these conversations. So the big takeaways, because always a teacher at heart, is that, one thing that we fundamentally understand is that Arizona lacks a comprehensive education game plan. And when looking at building that comprehensive education game plan from preschool and early childhood all the way to graduate degrees and beyond, we need to look at the inequities that exist in our systems. And unfortunately, many of those inequities fall along the lines of socioeconomic inequalities, racial and ethnic inequalities, and many times those two issues are created by geographical boundaries that we have in Arizona as well. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But as the CEO organization, we would like to engage with the entire stakeholder community, take a deep look at these issues, understand the data that we have that can help us answer some questions, and build a public policy path forward in a collaborative fashion for the state of Arizona. So in order to have these conversations, we put forth a framework. Now, like I said, this is not the game plan. This is a call to build the game plan for Arizona to level the playing field for our students. So starting in that bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the word innovation. Obviously, we know that our school system must innovate and change the way we do business. The school system is built on what I would like to call an archaic model based upon the Industrial Revolution. And as we saw over the last few months, and even really almost the last year, as we are facing this global pandemic, our schools have had to innovate. We need to take a deep look at what's working, what's not working, figure out what we need to do and keep as best practices and move that forward and look at funding in a new way. Now, many times we look at funding issues in just quantifiable ways, per pupil spending, teacher salary, and so forth. While those are important, but we also want to look at targeted funding, focusing on what we know works and really focusing on our efforts on collecting the data, which is that top left-hand corner, so that the data is usable, it's accessible, parents can access it, policymakers can access it, your school community can access it, so that we have the information we need at our fingertips to make data-driven decisions. And ultimately, we want to make sure that all kids in Arizona, no matter where you live, no matter what your zip code is, you have access to a top quality school. So with that in mind, our chairman, Michael Bidwell, who's the chairman of Greater Phoenix Leadership, you might also know him as the owner of the Arizona Cardinals, took a look at our school letter grades. And in Arizona, we use a letter grade system, much like other states do as well, A through F. And if you look at where students attend school, we have over 128,000 students attending a school that is identified as D or F. Now, these letter grades are pre-COVID, so there was no letter grades this past school year during the pandemic. And there's also, there will be a freeze on the letter grades during this school year. However, if you look at the number of students prior to the pandemic, that is an astronomical number. And just to put it in perspective, there's over 74,000 people that live in the city of Flagstaff. So more students are attending school in a D or F school than the people that live in the city of Flagstaff. So where are these schools located? Obviously, we could map all D or F schools based on the last letter grades, but we wanted to take just a little bit deeper dive. Where are the schools located that are persistently failing? And what we found when we look at schools that have received a D or an F in the last 3 years, that they are concentrated in urban corridors where we have a high level of poverty, and in our rural communities where a lot of our students are living in poverty, and on our tribal lands. So that was a big concern. And so the next level of analysis that we looked at was third grade reading. Obviously, there's a number of things we can look at on in terms of academic achievement for students, but we took a careful look at third grade reading. And these are the publicly available third grade reading demographic data here, and I'm going to dive into the test results data in just a minute. So of the third graders that took that third grade reading test back in 2019, which feels like a lifetime ago given the pandemic, you can see it's over 77,000 students, and you can see the breakout based upon different demographic categories. And what's really important here is to notice that the largest number of students by demographic category that we have in Arizona right now in third grade are Hispanic and Latino students. And so when you look at the third grade class and you think about where they are at in their education, they're about 9, 10, maybe 11 years old. They're 8 years away from graduating. So how are the third graders performing? Well, unfortunately, we found, results that are less than ideal. And when you look at Arizona minority students, and really these are Arizona emerging majority students, right? Our Hispanic and Latino students have the largest number of students in that third grade class. Well, in the 2019 AZ Merit testing results, they unfortunately were failing that third grade reading test at 56%. Our Black or African American students are failing, unfortunately, at 60%, and our American Indian or Alaskan Natives at 72%. And here's the thing, we know that the students are fully capable of learning and doing the work. And rather than looking at this as a problem to be solved, this is an opportunity to cultivate our greatest asset in Arizona. And so we want to look at this data and figure out what can we do to improve the schooling system for our kids who are finding the greatest challenge. Now, Arizona as a state created what are called the progress meters. And over 5 years ago, we launched them. And when we launched them, we looked at, this is the average of all of the demographics. We saw that our students were passing that third grade reading test at a 41% metric. However, if you advance 5 years, we're only at 46. So if we keep on that pace, only 5 points in 5 years, we will not meet our state goal of 72% of our third graders reading at that third grade AZ merit test, which is up for renewal next year, till 2047. And that will mean another series of generations of students will be failed by our schooling system. So when we started to really take, take a deeper dive and ask questions about it, we said, common sense would say, well, obviously we need to focus on our failing schools to figure out how we can improve them. Yes, we absolutely do. But what we also found is that students are failing in passing schools. So this data is a little bit cumbersome to read, so I'll just highlight some of the numbers for you to bring to your attention. And once again, all of this data is available online. I'll put it in the chat when I'm done presenting. So if you look at the number of students who did not pass that third grade reading test in A, B, and C schools, 54% of the students who failed were our minority students in passing schools. We've also broke this data out online for district versus charter, but this is all public schools at this point. So this idea of we've spent a lot of time focusing on failing schools, and rightfully so, because we want to make sure that our schools have access, our kids have access to a top quality school where they live, but we also need to make sure we're paying attention to our students in the school that they're attending as well. And it's really hard to get at this data. And this was an aha moment as well. So the way we count kids to, quote, pay for them, that's called our average daily membership, or ADM, we count them in October. So if you're counting third graders at the school level in October, that count is 82,226. Move over to the next line. If you count at the school level, third graders who took the third grade reading test, it's 70,024. There's a delta there of 12,202. That means there's 12,202 students who we don't have testing data for tied to any school. We don't have a testing data for them. So there's a variety of reasons this could be happening. Obviously, these are some of the questions we need to ask as we're building out this comprehensive education game plan. But ultimately, perhaps these students aren't making full academic year attendance in their school where they take the test, so they're not counted with that school's performance metric. But then move over to the next column. If a school has a small number of students, and that number is 10 or less, in an Excel file, these are Excel files publicly available on ADE's website, you will see that if there's less than 10 students in a cell, they redact that data. Now they're using an interpretation of a federal law and a rule of FERPA by not identifying those students so in that particular cell. But also if there's 150 students in a cell or in a class and they all scored in the same performance band, that entire class is redacted as well. So we have over 16,172 data points of redacted data. You add those two together, and that means there's 28,000 data points that are missing when we're trying to figure out what's happening with third grade reading. Now, GPL will, now, as we expand our social determinants and our policy work around the social determinants, we are applying a racial equity lens to all of our work, which brings me over to that right-hand column. You'll see a number 60%. Of the students who failed third grade reading and their data was redacted, 60% of that data is from Hispanic or Latino students, which just is outsized compared to the ratio of Hispanic or Latino students. So we just need to understand what's happening there and why that's happening, because ultimately our goal as an organization, and we share this goal with so many other organizations as well, every child in Arizona should have access to a top quality school. That word school was picked deliberately This is about building top quality public schools for our students in Arizona. And now modernizing that statement to say the school must fit the students' individual needs, because every student comes to their school with a different need and interest, because it's capturing the students' interest that's going to keep them connected to the school. So to run through, just to sum up the presentation here, once again, this is all online and it's actually about a 45 slide deck as well. I want to just make sure you are left with these key messages. Number one, obviously, all students have the ability to learn, and our school system must improve the most for students of color and students who live in poverty. That is borne out by the data. And we recognize that there are social factors that we need to understand as an organization, that we need to use to build whatever policy we're moving forward, and that we've done some things in Arizona that have moved us sort of towards these equity issues and equitable funding issues, but some of them are time bound, they've expired, they're no longer in place. So while they've been important, the reality is we do not have a comprehensive education game plan. And we know that there are inequities in the system. And COVID-19 has only shined a greater light on the inequities that we have to figure out a way to solve in Arizona. And then if you look at what happened last year and the horrific murder of George Floyd and the long overdue, critically important conversations that we are finally having as a country around racial inequities, those conversations need to come into the conversations we have about education as well. And the business community fundamentally believes that equity matters. We are committed to equity, and we need to use that lens to build out this comprehensive education game plan in a very collaborative fashion, which is why we're going to work over the next few months to identify stakeholders. I encourage you to go to the website, fill in one of the slides that we have for the form. If there's people you would like me to present to regarding this work that we're doing here. I've already probably presented to over 70 individuals and organizations since January 8th. Thank goodness for Zoom. I could never do this in the car. So I'm glad we have technology available to do this. But we want to continue to discuss this in a very public manner so that we can be all inclusive, and we welcome conversations with anybody who's on the webinar today. And we look forward to working with you in this fashion, because we know that Arizona is not unique in our findings, right? We think this problem happens in all other states. However, we want Arizona to be at the forefront of tackling these issues, and we want to do so with you. So with that, I'll just end here, and I'll let you know, and I'll put this in the chat. The website is available. The data is much more comprehensive online, and there's also a form there. And I'm going to pause here and hand it over to my good friend, Dr. Boyce, or to Teniqua. Will you do an introduction?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in, Heather. Thanks. Great job. And Dr. Boyce, I know we were going to keep things going, but Heather, you just like handed us a feast on a table. And I want to get to at least one question before we move in, because I think it's so critical to the moment. So if you don't mind, there was a question in the Q&A that says, what efforts are being taken to get leaders or the legislature to kind of accept that, in fact, there are inequities in education that are systemic and that need to be addressed?
That is a fabulous question. And that's what this work is really about. That's why we've really tried to elevate this conversation. We want to recognize that we are not the first organization to have this conversation. There have been tremendous number of reports and groups coming together to tackle this issue. Obviously, we've had Helios has done this work, Rodell has done this work, Center for the Future of Arizona, many of our philanthropic groups, many of our education groups. I know, we've got a ton of leaders that are on this call here as well. So we're building on all of this work. But here's what you have to remember. I'll just use our organization statistics as an example. Remember I said we have 144 members? 60% of our members are new to GPL in the last 5 years. And if you don't work in the education space, you wouldn't necessarily naturally know this information. So it is important for all of us as advocates to continue to share this information and the need to address the inequities in education. And when you talk about doing that with lawmakers, I can tell you as a former lawmaker, there's a lot of opportunity to share what we know and build awareness in the Arizona legislature as well. And I'm happy to work on that with you as well. We can talk about it in greater detail during the question and answer if you'd like more details.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. All right, we're going to hand it over to you to Dr. Boyce.
All right, thank you, Teniqua. Thank you, Dr. Carter. Really excited to have the opportunity to really come and share and talk about our community in front of this group. I want to say thank you to Dawn and the Flinn Foundation for creating space for what is a really dire and important and timely conversation and discussion. I'm going to go from and take it from kind of the high level and then zoom in and think about the conversation that's been happening so far through the lens of Roosevelt, our school district, and our community. I'm going to boot up my presentation and share my screen and jump in. So again, as mentioned, my name is Quintin Boyce. I am the proud superintendent here in the Roosevelt School District. I love this slide. I actually shared a version of this presentation in a different presentation this morning and realized that I've not changed my cover slide for quite some time. And it's really hard to do because these young men make me smile. They make me smile and they make me happy and they represent the best of who we are. So as I tell you this story, I want you to understand, I want you to remember that context matters. Context is really, really important. Context is not a predictor of the future. It's not a predictor of outcome, but it is really important to understand how to best navigate current state, especially when you're trying to bridge current state to ideal state. So I'm going to talk about Roosevelt, and I'm going to remind you that context matters. A rhetorical question that I have for you right now, and I want you to think about it. You don't have to put it down or write it down anywhere, but when you think about South Phoenix, which is where our school district is located, or when you think about Roosevelt School District, what is the first word that comes to mind? Dramatic pause so you can figure it out. You don't need to share, but I want you to just hold on to that answer for a minute. What is the first word that you think about when you think of South Phoenix and when you think of Roosevelt School District? I oftentimes use those two interchangeably. I'll share it and I'll probably say it 1,000 times. Roosevelt, we are South Phoenix. We are the largest employer in our community, which means the bigger the better we are, the bigger the better South Phoenix is. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to stand before our community. I just started in this community. We had a convocation right down the street at South Mountain High School in the auditorium. We had over 1,000 employees together. We were getting ready to launch the 1920 school year. And in that session, I told our community, and again, I interchange South Phoenix and Roosevelt all the time. If you were to go ahead and place and put South Phoenix in Google on that day, these were the first images that returned. And I had people do it. Put it in your phone, Google South Phoenix and hit images, and these were the first images that returned. That's problematic. It's a problem for me, and it should be a problem for you. When I think about our community, our students, our families, our staff, who they call South Phoenix and they call Roosevelt home, more often than not, these are the types of images we see. So when I think about like, how does that interact with your psyche, with your sense of worth when what's perpetuated are images like these? Again, as we talk through the lens of equity, pictures are powerful and words matter. This is not who we are. We are a community of over 1,000 employees. Again, a humble brag, we are the largest employer right here in our community, in our backyard. We have over 100 community partners that work, they shoulder up with us to do the work that we do, engage in a social experience called teaching and learning. And my favorite part, we have 8,000 beautiful young people, ready, willing, positioned to do amazing things, to change lives, and to be awesome human beings. We have 19 beautiful learning communities, each with their own school climate and culture and ethos and uniqueness, but still a part of the overarching Roosevelt School District family. So again, when you think about Roosevelt, these pictures are not satisfactory. When you think about South Phoenix, this is not who we are. Instead, I want you to think about these pictures. I want you to think about him, and I want you to think about her. These pictures more appropriately represent Roosevelt School District, more appropriately represent South Phoenix and who we are. But make no mistake, we're far from perfect. Data was shared just minutes ago, and a lot of that data is true for our community. We've, over the last decade, we've seen a decline in enrollment. We occupy 3 zip codes, 85040, 85041, and 42. And again, we have those 19 learning communities, and within our boundaries, in our backyards, there are 30 charter schools. There's voucher systems that are available, and expansion is being considered. We've been declining over time. And honestly, to the fact that there's some things that we could have done better throughout our history. We've created opportunity for others. This is true. Other gaps, because we're far from perfect. There is an opportunity for improvement when it comes to student learning and achievement. We know that our adults need additional growth and support to be better professionals, to be better skilled at what they do. These are all facts and these are all true. Understanding that to be true, we are still dedicated towards this journey, this mission of success. We want to create the conditions where our teachers can be amazing and our students can flourish to prep them for life after Roosevelt. We want them to go on to high school and be exceptional, be amazing, to go beyond high school, college, career, and life, and be amazing citizens for their community, to change the world. So despite context, this is what our journey is. This is what our calling is. So again, context matters. When we talk about Roosevelt School District, we talk about the demographic we serve, those 8,000 beautiful young people and their families. We are a community of color. We are a community that navigates poverty. Nearly 100% of our families qualify for free or reduced lunch, which means they live at or below that poverty line. And when that's your circumstance, there's so many things that you navigate even outside of the school. When people think education, people think teaching and learning. And teaching and learning is what we do. But teaching and learning is only part of what we do. We're social workers. We stand in so many gaps for our families. To the best of our ability, we shoulder up with our families to help create opportunities because we know education is really that ultimate equalizer. That means when you think about the demographic I just mentioned, our families, they navigate immigration issues, and we shoulder up and navigate those issues with them. As Senator Carter mentioned, we stand firm, we advocate, we are the voice for our community when it comes to ongoing social injustices that have been here since the beginning of time, generations and decades, but really have been amplified over the last year. We also know as we talk about those social determinants, affordable housing in our community is a big deal, is a big thing, especially as we think about if you've not been to South Phoenix lately, it is changing. It is changing over time, creating this economic tension between families that have been here for quite some time and new families that are moving in. There's a Chick-fil-A in South Phoenix that did not exist just years ago. In addition to affordable housing, we know access to quality healthcare. That is something that we stand in the gaps and we shoulder up when it comes to our families. And when you talk about impoverished community, there's oftentimes a food insecurity. Having access to high quality, nutritious food options, it can be a food desert. Context matters, and this is all a reality of our community. And when we think about the last 12 months, as mentioned by Dr. Carter, we're working through this in the midst of a global pandemic. Now, I want to be clear, the COVID-19 global pandemic did not cause inequities. These inequities existed before, it just merely exacerbated those inequities, whether you're talking about food, access to resource, access to healthcare. The global pandemic that we're currently navigating only made it that gap between the have and have-nots wider. And that is the context we know, and those are the things that we fight for. So understanding that context and knowing that to be true, where do we go from here? Another rhetorical question for you just to grapple with and think about on your own. Thinking about those social determinants that are mentioned before, we have a rank order based on the feedback and perspective of membership for this particular webinar. But what are those things when you talk about creating the conditions for a high quality experience for young people when it comes to school? Like, what are those things that are truly needed to make a difference? What are those things that have to be present, especially when you consider all the variables outside of the schoolhouse that have to be addressed, that have to be mitigated, just to create an opportunity to really push in when it comes to teaching and learning? What would that list be if you were to populate it for yourself? I'll take you on a journey. 2 years ago, I started my tenure here in Roosevelt. This last year, navigating a pandemic, I should get credit for 10 years. So 2 years, maybe 12 years, depending on what type of math you wanted to do. But I started February 5th, 2019. I started mid-year, and there's a whole nother presentation about that. But I came in February of 2019, and I had a half of academic year left. Understanding inequities that exist. And I was a part of the community from afar, not as intimately connected now that I'm a member of the Roosevelt family, but I knew what some of those challenges were within our community. I also knew what the opportunities and the things that were going really well in the community. When I got here, for me, it was really important to not just dive into this idea of fixing. I wanted to learn by listening. I engaged in this listening tour with our governing board to figure out, like, what are those things that we're really proud of when it comes to being a South Phoenix or Roosevelt community? And what are those things that we really have to work on? Like, I wanted to hear firsthand from people. So during that spring, for me, it was really all about learning by listening. In addition to that, I know leadership matters. Strong organizations require strong leaders. And so with the support of our governing board, I proposed a restructure that was cost neutral. We had really talented people in our community at the time, but there were also some gaps. Thinking about some of those things that I shared before between student learning and achievement, opportunities for supporting our staff better, declining enrollment, I proposed a new team that could help really be hyper-focused on targeting some of those opportunities for growth. In summer of 2019, we really focused on changing our structure and also listening. That took us into the summer. Summer of 2019, we had a brand new district team. We had new membership on our governing board who had a heart for the work, driven by purpose, and we launched into the beginning of the 1920 academic year. I was really excited about my first full year with our new team in our community. I remember, again, back to convocation where I showed those images, those pictures of South Phoenix. I also remember planting a flag that our moniker, our battle cry would be bold. We will be bold. We will be bold for Zyler on the left, who, this is a picture after I had the chance to go hang out at his school for a career day. The very next day, I got a picture from his principal, and she said he dressed up like you because he wants to be a superintendent. I appreciate Zyler, and I wish I looked that cool. On the right, we have Kayleen, who was a pre-K kiddo getting ready, prepped to start her academic journey the following year as a kinder student. We planted the flag that our battle cry would be bold. At convocation, I shared this, and I also read a narrative that be bold means take action, just go. A champion of being bold doesn't shy away from competition that seems unsurmountable or opportunities that feel impossible. They think outside of the box, they write new stories. They feel empowered to make decisions and take action. Stop wondering, wouldn't it be cool if, and start living it. When this person is unsure about the next step to take, he or she starts with what they know and creates the path one step at a time, building confidence and momentum. Inaction is the enemy of innovation, which was mentioned earlier by Dr. Carter. The work that we had to do was paramount. It was important. And from that beginning of that first full academic year, we planted the flag and we said, we will be bold for our kids. We will be bold for our families. We will be bold for our community. Because the reality is that sometimes when people think about communities of color or communities that navigate poverty, there can be a deficit perspective. Like, these kids can't, these families won't. And I'm gonna always push it back against that narrative. I firmly believe, our community firmly believes that our students, our families, our people have a certain level of grit and perseverance that when coupled with access and opportunity, they can, they will, and they have gone on to do amazing things, be amazing people, be advocates, and change the world. So this is how we started that 2019-20 academic year. We hit the ground running. We had a battle cry. We were changing belief systems and perspectives. And we also needed some actual tangible work, a focus. When we got here, there's a lot of work to do. And when there's a lot to do, it's really easy to do nothing. And so I told our team, we're going to pick 5 things that we're going to focus on for 19-20. These won't be the only 5 things that we do, but these will be the 5 things we measure at the end of the year to look back and say whether or not we had a successful year. We picked this idea of customer experience. We want to be very mindful of how we treat each other and how we treat our external stakeholders, especially as we try to change the narrative, the brand of South Phoenix, the narrative, the brand of Roosevelt, and bring families back to our community. We wanted to focus on leadership development. Strong organizations have strong leaders. We wanted to build a pipeline of our own. We wanted to help our professionals be better professionals in their current jobs and grow them for future opportunities that they may not have even identified themselves. We also invested heavily in professional learning communities. So talking about that gap and that opportunity of increased student learning and achievement, research says that can't happen in a vacuum. That requires teachers working together, grappling with data, modifying and adjusting to create the best conditions for students to do well and perform. Curriculum adoption, when we got here, our team, we noticed like from an equity standpoint, that there was an opportunity here. And we've invested in just 2 years, millions of dollars in guaranteed and viable curricula that we've now deployed to every school. So when it comes to equity and experiences, whether you're talking about student or you're talking about teacher, they're really high quality materials from classroom to classroom and school building to school building. And finally, our 5th and final priority for 19-20 was Apple integration. We decided, thank goodness, pre-pandemic, that we wanted to heavily invest in technology. Every kid has a beautiful Apple device, every teacher has 2. And we were very mindful about that. We want our students, despite circumstances, not only to have access to technology, but we want them to have access to the gold standard, which arguably is Apple products. And thank goodness, I'll circle back around to that we made that decision again, pre-pandemic. I'm also really excited during that 19-20 year, we launched those 5 priorities to get through the year, but identified that we really needed to think big and create a strategic plan. We did not have a strategic plan when I arrived. We knew we wanted to be very intentional and mindful of what happens over the next 5 years. So we launched a strategic planning process during 2019 that would ultimately take an entire year to culminate because we were very intentional and purposeful through the process. We didn't want one person or a group of people to develop a plan. We wanted that plan to have community ownership, community input, and community buy-in. So during 2019, during that fall, we launched this journey. And I'm super jazzed. That was our freshman year, if you will, to stick with the education vernacular. And we were moving, we were humming as a team, changing perspective, identifying gaps, building systems, plugging along through 19-20. And then spring break hit, March of 2020. Pandemic existed way before then, but it became the reality right here in our own backyard. March of 2020, we were away on spring break. And that's when things really changed and became real right here in our own backyard. And schools closed. And like many communities, when schools closed, we entered into this state of survival. Like terms like remote learning and distance learning started to surface, but quite frankly, it was emergency learning. Our community and communities alike had to figure things out almost overnight. And what we realized, our infrastructure, our system wasn't ready to move everything from a traditional, I will quote Dr. Carter, archaic model to this new innovative space that was required almost instantly as a result of a global pandemic. I often share that this pandemic has forced us and everybody to be uncomfortably innovative. We're now thinking differently about education, which is amazing because the old way didn't work for all. And we're not going to go back to the old way. So we finished the academic year, our freshman year, our first year, 19-20, in the midst of a pandemic. So then what? We took lessons learned and we spent last summer, the summer of 2020, working through impossible decision after impossible decision like every other school district. Are we gonna launch virtual? Can we come in person? It was really difficult, it was really tough, but we doubled down on professional development, professional learning to make sure that our educators were prepped to embark on the beginning of the year in a virtual format, knowing that for so many of our educators, they felt like they were rendered to their first year. Whether they really were a first-year teacher or a 20-year vet, we were all first year all over again. Our administrators, our principals, our governing board, we were all year one all over again, never having to navigate a global pandemic. So then we moved to the launch of this current academic year, 2020-21. Thinking about the Be Bold moniker, we added on top of that. This year, we adopted the slogan, the moniker, I am Roosevelt, we are Roosevelt, somos Roosevelt. For me, it's all about changing mindset. It is all about changing perspective. And it's really important for me that we do, and we start that right here within our own backyard. I want our people, our family members, our staff to have a sense of pride in our community. Because once we start here, we then change those perspectives that are outside of our community. So starting this year, we did it with a slogan. We also, at the beginning of the academic year 2021, I'm super excited, our strategic plan finally came to culmination. We have a brand new mission statement and a brand new vision statement, each word chosen and decided on with intention down to the order because words matter. We are community united, not a united community, a community united to create better futures for all through education, all not just students, but adults alike. Through this vehicle of education, we're building strong foundations through authentic and innovative experiences to ensure success for every student. So I'm extremely proud about our mission and vision statement. In addition to that, we adopted 9 core values. We will be a values-driven organization. We are a values-driven organization. And in fact, as you navigate impossible decision after impossible decision, couched in the middle of a pandemic, you have to be values-driven because you're making decisions that impact so many lives. And I am proud to say that we have values with working definitions. So when I say collaboration, people in our community understand what that means. When we say equity, we have shared definitions. And finally, when it comes to our strategic plan, in addition to a mission statement, vision statement, core values, we have 4 strategic goals. Each strategic goal has key priorities, have proposed actions, and then performance indicators to measure success. That's how we launched this year. That's how we're navigating this year. We now have focus, direction, and a 5-year plan. But what now? Where do we go from here? What we've realized is that it's impossible to do this work in a vacuum. It is impossible to do this work by ourselves. We understand that at the intersection of business and school is opportunity, which is why I'm really excited about our blooming partnership with GPL. We have our values, and there are values that exist there within that organization. And the sweet science is when values align, when purpose align, when intentions align, amazing things can happen. So as we continue to talk through what a partnership could look like between Roosevelt and GPL, we've talked about ideas like community kitchens, which means bringing people together on campuses, really being a staple, our schools for our community, thinking about the affordable housing issues that plague not only our entire country, but right here in our backyard in South Phoenix, thinking about how do we re-energize teaching and learning. We're moving in Roosevelt from not just simply neighborhood schools, but schools with signature programs and academies. And as we develop those, how do we think about partnering with business so we have this theoretical framework of teaching and learning with a signature focus coupled with real life practitioners who do that work to add context to standards, to make learning matter, all the way down to technical assistance. Again, thinking about what are some of those things that we may not think about as an educational institution that a business perspective may see, but we can collaborate to not only change what happens within our schools. But again, I keep talking about the entire South Phoenix community. The bigger and the better we are as Roosevelt, the bigger and the better South Phoenix is as a community. And now that we've found partnership within GPL, we have people that have a heart for the work, that have shared values, and I'm really excited about what potentially could happen next. So with that, that is taking kind of the data from a high level and looking at it through the context of the south side of Phoenix and Roosevelt School District. It's Teniqua.
Thank you, Dr. Boyce. Again, you delivered a lot. There was some moments where I felt like I was on the journey with you. And I'm really glad that you had an opportunity to share this with the community. There are some alarming things that have happened in the presentations around numbers, opportunities, and we'll get to that with a lot of questions. And so we have a number of questions. So I'm going to try to get to them. Thank you, audience, for putting your questions in the chat. So Dr. Boyce and Dr. Carter, I'm going to just read them and then you can figure out who wants to respond. I think, Dr. Boyce, this one may be for you. As you know, policies established by your governing board can make a difference. What policies focus on systemic equity have the governing board created and passed in Roosevelt School District for curriculum, cultural competency, staffing, family, and community engagement?
Awesome, that's a great question. Just recently, back in the fall, our governing board passed an equity resolution. So really planting the flag just to really articulate what we stand for, what they stand for as a board. And that's equity when it comes to curricula. It's an equity when it comes to hiring practices with membership of leadership. And that really has been the charge for us as a team to go back and look at everything we do. With that resolution, we're now reviewing policies as a community. We're being more intentional, and that actually comes out of our strategic plan. What are our practices, policies, and procedures? Making sure that we have this equity lens as we make decisions, whether it's programming decisions, whether it's curriculum decisions, whether it's personnel decisions. So I'm really proud of our board by taking that first stand at being very clear. This is who we are, and this is who we stand for. This is who we advocate for. And that's been the jumping off point for now, just reevaluating some of the practices that have happened in the past, looking at policies, and really evaluating curriculum. Like we're going through a curriculum adoption right now. In fact, 2 years ago, we adopted an ELA curriculum for our entire district, which was huge. It didn't exist. The following year, we adopted math. This year, we're doing science and social studies, and we're doing it through an equity lens. What does representation look like? How does it land with the demographic we serve? So that's been a really great first step of our board as we now continue just to comb through some of the practices that exist when it comes to learning or supporting students as far as dispositions.
Cool, thank you, Dr. Boyce. So Dr. Carter, I want to get back to you because there was one of your slides that literally was like, we're on fire. And that's just my terminology, which was how many students that are not at grade level at schools that are perceived by the public as good schools. So when you talk about sort of that racial equity lens of your work, you know, how do you actually go about that, understanding that we need that perception? If it's gonna definitely level the playing field, you know, how do we change in a very alarming slide like that through the lens and the conversations that you're having in the meetings that you're having on the business community? Excuse me.
Well, first of all, thank you for that question. And I want to say I have not seen Dr. Boyce's presentation. So Dr. Boyce, there's a couple slides in there I want to get. Definitely the one with the fan. We have a little chat going on the side of saying, I think everybody wants the one with the fan. That one was, very appropriate. And also really that slide where it shows business and education and the intersection where opportunity really lies. And at GPL, we are ensuring that we keep diversity and inclusion at top of mind in all of our decision-making and advocacy efforts. So as the CEO community, we know that it is important to lead on these efforts We need to promote equity and inclusion. And so as we look at our policy work through those, through the task forces that loop up to the standing committee, everything from education to transportation to arts and culture and water, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We have a focus on equity, and we want to ensure that all Arizonans benefit from our CEO work, not just the business community. So we're the CEO group, but this is about the future of Arizona and building a state that we are all proud of, that we hope to attract additional talent here to Arizona, and that we know that we're setting up our kids and our community for success. So it really is everything that we do. When we put a policy or an advocacy position forward, we say, what does this do to drive equity and inclusion? And so it's just, it's putting it, you know, Dr. Boyce talked about being very intentional, right? Values driven. We are very intentional in our work, and we've organized ourselves around that value as well.
Thank you.
The second half of that question is about kids failing and passing schools. You know, obviously I want to recognize the work that has been done for over a decade, really, in Arizona to really dissect the education data that we have and understand the challenges to getting the data. But that one slide, I mean, I was in office for 10 years and I've never seen the data presented like that. You know, we spent all this time looking at failing schools, but we cannot forget that we have students that attend schools that are A, B, and C, and they're not getting the services they need in those schools. And it's kind of just glossed over. I like to say, you know, kids are struggling in plain sight. We have to make sure that we're looking at student success at every single corner that is possible. And some of the schools that are ranked A and B and C, they don't have the support system set up for some of our kids that come to school hungry or come to school worried about whether they're going to be evicted from their homes. And so that's a much more complicated problem that we have to understand so that we build this education, the sustainable, long-term, comprehensive education game plan. We can't just be myopic and say, oh, we're going to take D and F schools to C or better and wash our hands of it, because that's not going to get at the numbers that we think we need to get at for Arizona.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. All right, we got the chat kind of blowing up, so hopefully both of you are ready. I think this will be for you, Dr. Boyce, and this one's probably, let me just read it. We know that COVID has exacerbated inequities within the educational system and social determinants. In normal times, we cannot address some of the racial disparities in academic performance without tying it to disciplinary structures. According to the State School Counselors Association, the student to counselor ratio is roughly 925 students to 1, coupled with SROs. What work is being done to prioritize more resources for academic success over punishment?
Very cool. That is a great question. Thank you. I'll do my best. I'll talk at a system level first, and then I'll take a stab at a larger level. I know for our community, we really prioritize the idea of social and emotional learning and social health. That was prior to pandemic. A couple of years ago when I arrived, we didn't have social workers on every campus. We had social workers that had a caseload of 1, 2, 3 campuses possibly. And so one of the things that we immediately did after just assessing like what the current state was, we got rid of programs that we didn't need it, expenditures that we didn't need it, and we invested in people. And so now I'm really happy to see we have a social worker on every campus. I know there have been some initiatives at the state level applying for school safety grants, and we've done that. And with that application, you could have applied for a social worker, a counselor, or an SRO. We had already internally funded social workers on every campus. So we didn't qualify for that piece, but instead we applied for counselors. So I'm really excited we have counselors. Not only that we applied for every campus, we didn't get every campus, but we have a number of new counselors, which is really important. Pre-pandemic. Now that we're in the midst of a pandemic, and we know that students in a lot of communities have not been in front of the public eye, are navigating so many things outside of school, we've been really intentional about what does support look like. We work directly with ASU. We have a phenomenal partnership with ASU. We have a resident associate professor who's on loan from Mary Lou Fulton that has been instrumental in us creating, if you will, a SEL initiative. We didn't have a director of social emotional learning before. We hired one a year ago. And through her work and our team's work, we're creating an SEL practice, a model, a program that's not just a standalone, but looking at how is that interwoven into the academic experiences of not just our kids, but our teachers as well. You know, we've implemented things like community circles. I dare say restorative justice and restorative practices, because that becomes very jargony these days. But our big push is moving away from dispositions that are punitive, that don't change behavior, and instead think about how can we better support our kids, really uncover and figure out what's the root cause. How do we help with some of those root cause issues, which are some of those social determinants that were mentioned before, so we can help position our kiddos to be in a place where they can be successful. We've also done a lot of work when it comes to mindset. Sometimes there can be a disconnection between students that are served and the perspective of teachers that serve them, whether it's cultural differences or SEL or SES differences. So we've created uncomfortable conversations around implicit bias. So there are a lot of things that we've started to really shift how we look at our students, and not from a deficit perspective, but an asset-based perspective, and know that when something happens as far as behavior, they're kids, they're beautiful kids, and they're root issues. And if we just simply address behaviors at a very surface level, we never really get to what's really going on. So I'm happy in our community, we've been very intentional about really allocating resources around what we've communicated is important, which is a social and emotional support for our students. Again, at a higher level, I know a lot of communities are moving in that direction. I feel like the pandemic has amplified that target of we have to talk SEL, we have to talk social and emotional. So again, thinking about what's been created as a result of current pandemic. So on a district level, we're making gains, some pretty cool gains when it comes just to the number of people that are available to work with our kids and organizations that we've partnered up with community partners. In a larger conversation outside of Roosevelt, just in education period, there's that ongoing narrative, that ongoing conversation of how do we support our students? They've been away for far too long. There's crisis going on at home. So what systems do we have to put in place for when they come back if they're not back? And if they are back, issues that are being demonstrated.
Cool, thank you, Dr. Boyce. And I love the very much asset-based approach. I mean, there are so many images you shared from the beginning that don't reflect that. And so to try to keep moving into the positive and moving into the space where it really allows more opportunity and access is definitely something that I think is important to create change. So I have a question around something that Dr. Carter, you started, which is one of the participants talked about not, so I agree that we can't be myopic. The work of First Things First suggests that you can't just focus on the child, but the family system and the environment within which they are maneuvering. What is being done to collaborate or work to address the social determinants for those needs?
So in terms of the work at Greater Phoenix Leadership, we're looking at cross collaboration within our task force. So for example, I'm looking at the Q&A. You know, we have vitalists in the Q&A talking about trauma-informed care with a specific question to Dr. Boyce. But in our work in GPL, we're talking about these social determinants. So we have a task force related to affordable housing, homelessness and affordable housing. Well, one of the Roosevelt Works initiatives that they brought forth to GPL, and that Roosevelt Works document that Dr. Boyce mentioned at the end of his presentation talked about affordable housing. So that doesn't fall under quote education, but guess what? That has an impact on what happens in the classroom. I mean, all the way down through the delivery system, from the very top to the child sitting in the classroom. And so looking at ways that we can come together across different task forces that we have. You know, we have another task force around transportation. Well, we know that transportation is an issue for many of our students. Think about it. If you need to extend the school day for tutoring or after school support, what do you do about transportation? And so is there something we can do at the legislative level? Maybe there's something we can do at the city level, looking at bus routes and making sure that they're safe and making sure that they are located near a high quality school. There's lots of different ways to look at these things from an interdisciplinary standpoint. And I really think that's sort of this next wave of conversations we need to have around education, is to make sure that we are looking at everything that impacts that reading score. You know, it's not just about what happens on that day that that child took the test. The child doesn't leave his or her entire life at the door when they walk into that classroom. And so if you take that myopic look at just what happens on that day when you take the test, you're missing sort of the forest for the trees. And so if you really want to move the needle in a way that's sustainable and comprehensive, you have to look at all of that. Now, I spent my career in education. Obviously, all of us here, you know, we know that you can drill and kill and try to get a kid to just bump up a few points on a test, but that's not going to be sustainable. We're talking about creating life skills that are going to last a lifetime for them. And that's how you have to look at this from a comprehensive standpoint. But another person asked in the question, you know, how do you measure success? We will put metrics in place to measure success, but just as important as the metrics of success on reading are metrics of success around the social determinants as well. And if you have time, I'm going to give a big shout out to the Vitalist data roadmap that they have on their website. I'll try to put it in the question and answer box as well. You can look there and you can start to move the needle on some of these social determinants, which we know are correlated with academic success as well. So it's a much more comprehensive picture. I will share that website in the chat as well.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. And thank you to all the participants for your questions in the Q&A. Thank you for your patience. I'm trying to get through all of them. We have a little less than 15 minutes. So Dr. Carter and Dr. Boyce, I'm going to just hand them to you. So I'm actually on that note about Vitalists. So Dr. Boyce, this is specifically for you. How are you handling the adverse childhood experiences and trauma that kids in your district have experienced?
Awesome question. Thank you. And it kind of dovetails on the previous piece around looking at what membership looks like as far as our staff. You know, again, just 2 years ago, we only had a fraction of the support systems in place as far as social workers and counselors, and now an SEO director, a partnership with ASU. So we're creating, if you will, an entire roadmap of what it looks like to support the child. And the really cool work is we're embarking on a journey of looking at that not just as a set aside, like you can't just do that in a vacuum, but what does that look like when you weave it into like the academic experiences that our kiddos engage in. In addition to that, we're super fortunate to be able to collaborate with a number of community partners. And any community partner, I always open it up. If you have a heart for the work and you have a heart for our community, I want to be super clear. It's not a sympathetic, deficit-based want to save. If you have a heart for the work and a heart for the community and our values align, we're always looking to partner. But between how we've been super clear in our strategic plan, that taking care of the whole child is a focus, that being really intentional about supporting social and emotional learning is important. We've created those opportunities in-house, but we've also reached out and worked with our community and some of our community partners. And that the cool thing is extended even beyond just our students, but that's present in some of the resources that we provide for our families as well, whether it be access to healthcare, counseling, or a number of different things that we've fortunately been able to amp up over the last 12 months during our pandemic that we're navigating.
I think you're on mute, Teniqua.
On mute, yeah. Sorry. Alrighty. So first question, and then you mentioned you have we talked about this whole webinar has been about the partnership with Roosevelt School District. Do you have partnerships with state colleges, universities, or the Phoenix Union High School District?
Yes, yes, and yes. I'll work backwards, starting with Phoenix Union. Prior to coming to Roosevelt, I spent 15 years in Phoenix Union, and I started my teaching career right down the street at South Mountain High School, which was why when this opportunity presented itself, it was something I couldn't pass up. You know, when I think about students that come from Roosevelt, oftentimes when they go to high school, Phoenix Union has 13 elementary districts that feed into Phoenix Union, which covers the Phoenix metro area. And when you look at thinking about academic performance, you disaggregate it by district, more often than not, Roosevelt was towards the bottom when it came to academic preparedness. So when I had the chance to come and be intimately a part of this family, of this community, to think about changing those learning experiences at the beginning, I couldn't pass it up. But also knowing and being a part of Phoenix Union for 15 years, we're not a unified community, knowing that that's a union high school and the 13 feeders, but we've been working really hard to collaborate and be intentional about that jump from 8th to 9th grade, even if you're in a unified district, is ginormous. When you talk about two totally different school districts or systems, it's even larger. And then when you weave in social determinants, it's almost sometimes it feels impossible. So I'm really happy. When it comes to collaboration, since March of 2020, immediately following spring break, myself and the other 13 superintendents that occupy this footprint of Phoenix, we meet every week. Every Monday or Tuesday, we meet for anywhere between 1 to 2 hours to talk about partnership, decisions, and that's been a really, really amazing experience. So there's a lot of direct partnership with Phoenix Union, long story longer. When it comes to universities, we pride ourselves in having partnerships with all of our major universities, even the community college system. And that's everything from being really intentional about shoring up our teacher pipeline, knowing shortages exist. It also includes the work I talked about with Dr. Carl Hermans, who's an associate professor at Arizona State University. We have him on loan for 2 years to really help develop our SEL program. And we've also created this opportunity recently through ASU to think about resources in the wake of COVID. You know, one of the gaps that existed right here in South Phoenix, which is an example of inequities that exist, is there was no large scale testing when it came to COVID in South Phoenix. Forever, didn't exist. There are a number of really cool things that happened, organizations trying their best, creating, experiences, once a week or every other week at different locations of mobile, but it's like a really, really big, large, didn't exist. We talked to ASU and said we need some saliva testing. And 3 weeks ago, we launched it, one of our schools. It's every weekend. ASU does a huge, large scale saliva testing. So we partner with universities when it comes to teacher pipeline, when it comes to programming, when it comes to getting ready for college. And we've also partnered with universities when it comes to resources. So I'm really excited about that because, again, we can't do it alone, we know. And as long as we have people who have a heart for the work, we've been able to make some pretty cool gains, some pretty big gains. Because at the end of the day, like these children, our children, no matter what you do, what field you're in, our kids are your kids too.
Thank you, Dr. Boyce. All right, we have about 9 minutes. I'm gonna say 8 minutes because I'm gonna take the last minute. So Dr. Carter, I'm gonna give you a question, and then Dr. Boyce and Dr. Carter, I am going to give you a question for you both to answer. And then I just wanna say to the audience, thank you for your questions. Those that we did not get to answer, we will definitely see if the panelists can follow up with you individually. So Dr. Carter, educational equity, which is the whole premise behind this series, is crucial to social mobility, but every student every student, isn't designated for a 4-year university, isn't destined, for a 4-year university. With the emerging focus of GPL, has there been a discussion around entrepreneurship, on-the-job training, mentorship, or upskilling?
Yes, and thank you, Michael, for asking that question. We have a task force related to workforce. And you hit the nail on the head. We are really trying to understand the landscape that exists from a public policy standpoint around mentorship, entrepreneurship, on-the-job training, internships, and so forth. You know, I've done a lot of work on this in the legislature, and now what I am trying to do with our partners is figure out who's doing what and where, so that we can figure out what best practices are and how do you scale that up. For example, you heard Dr. Boyce talk about signature programs, and it really is about getting people working out in these high demand fields where sometimes it doesn't require a 4-year degree, but yet they cannot find people to do this work, and yet they're high paying, high quality, really good jobs. And so trying to get the business community into the school community to understand that these jobs are available, and then to understand the training that's necessary to reach those type of career goals, and looking at it as a career pipeline, and really trying to build that information early into the education system, because ultimately it's almost too late if you just wait to high school, right? You've got to reach these kids' hearts and minds and passions when they're young, and they have an opportunity to say, hey, that sounds like a super cool job, because that can really connect them to the curriculum. It's making the education that happens in the classroom relevant. So yes, internships, apprenticeships, on-the-job training, thinking like an entrepreneur. I'll end with this. Center for the Future of Arizona has brought to our attention at GPL this idea of a portrait of a graduate. Many of our CEOs in their HR departments use these sort of behavior assessments to understand what is really desired as a new employee. And it's things like thinking critically, being able to collaborate, and all these sort of behavior skills that are also so important to the job market and to your future success as an individual. So we're really looking forward to some opportunities in partnering, and we too partner beyond just Roosevelt. We're really trying to increase our opportunity to work with education partners as well. So thanks for asking that question.
Thank you. All right, so I'm trying to pick our last question, I think, to really pull this together. And I'm going to ask the question for both of you, and consider your answers within 2 minutes. One of the things that we've learned is that individuals can be too close to the work to be objective about assessing the work and determining success of intermittent efforts. How is this going to happen for GPL and Roosevelt?
So go for it.
Okay, well, I'll just share, Dr. Boyce, our work. Like we're in the forming stage of our partnership, right? And we're forming an official MOU, right? To kind of spell out, here's what the work will include, being very deliberate to say, okay, we can't do absolutely everything. There's just not enough time, space, energy to do it. So it really is about clearly identifying what the opportunities are for partnership, creating measurable goals to meet those specific things that will spell out in the MOU, and then periodically going back and checking against that document. In our task forces, we create charter documents with clearly outlined achievable goals with timelines associated to them. And that's sort of the framework that we'll use as well as we continue to build out this partnership, and done in a very collaborative fashion. We're not, this isn't just a one-way street. This is truly a two-way street, because that's the only way we're going to have success. So we have to both believe in the goals and the measurements and tracking towards those goals.
That's perfect. I want to make sure I can even add something valuable to that statement. I think Dr. Carter captured it perfectly. I think about our community, and I mentioned in our presentation earlier that we just created a strategic plan, and that was really important because we wanted to have direction for the next 5 years. And so when we talk about this partnership, a lot of that comes right from our strategic plan, which we created, that has goals, proposed actions, and performance indicators. So being very mindful of where we want to go, setting that target, and then having proposed actions and measurable indicators will make sure that we don't get caught in the forest and we look up and nothing's happened. So I'm pretty confident that that intention will exist so that we can do the right work to have the right outcome.
And on that note about proposed action, what kind of call to action would both of you like to leave our participants today?
Well, I'll start because I give the same homework in every talk that I have an opportunity to get in front of 2 or more people. And it was alluded to in one of our questions. A lot of the work that we're going to do will lead to some sort of legislative action. So my homework for you is to email your lawmakers. You have 2 representatives and 1 senator. Teniqua promises me you should know who they are. So you can either wait until the video is posted, or you can just share like a big takeaway from today's conversation. But email your lawmakers, tag Dr. Boyce and tag myself, tag Teniqua, and say, we spent an hour and a half talking about partnering with business and education to address equity issues. We hope that you do the same. Please learn more. And that's the only way we're going to continue to increase the awareness. You can't assume they already know this. If they don't come to this work through their own profession or come to it naturally, they wouldn't know that some of the challenges. So your homework is to email your 2 representatives and your 1 senator and tag us. I'll put it in the chat.
And I would ditto that and be super quick in saying just being informed, being involved. I believe in this idea of being values driven. And so especially in that space when it comes to education, look through that equity lens and support your local school, whether it be with your time, your talent, your treasure. So we know decisions have to be made, through policy. While we champion and push for that through that lens of equity, push into your local schools, like understand the story, understand the context, because that's really important and it paints a bigger picture.
Thank you, Dr. Boyce. And I am going to encourage each of my fellows and advocates and allies and educators to definitely do your call to action. Reach out to both of these individuals and these organizations. There is so much more to this conversation that we can have, and there's so much more to do, but we are out of time. So I would like to take the time to thank Dr. Carter and Dr. Boyce for their time and talents for this presentation. And again, the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership for their commitment for creating a platform for advancing educational equity series conversations. And to Chris Farmington for serving as our technology guru. We hope that the content and the conversation resonated with you today and sparked some interest in participating in either working with these organizations or supporting these organizations for issues that may or may not affect you and your family every day. Thanks again for your time and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.